Welcome guys. Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts has finished its development and there will be no further updates from now on. So I thought now would be a good time to do a quick strategy guide for the campaign. So this is a strategy guide, not a mechanics guide. I have done a mechanics guide in the past. So this will be talking primarily on how to actually be successful in the campaign. At the start of the game, the two main things that you need to worry about are not getting blockaded. So I started as Austro-Hungarian Empire in this game. So these were the ports that I had. And so the only sea zone that we needed to protect is the Adriatic. If you don't have at least 50% of the enemy power projection, which you can see when you hover over the name of the sea, then you will get put into a blockade. So you need to make sure to protect your core ports. When I say core, I mean the areas that you start the game off with. So later on in the game, like you can see here, I've conquered a lot of territory, which has got Western Mediterranean, Central Mediterranean, and North Sea, Baltic Sea. All of these are irrelevant when concerning the blockades. The only thing that's relevant with the blockades is the areas that you start the game off with the campaign, which I refer to as your core territories. So you need to make sure that you leave enough ships in your core territory sea area, sea zone, to make sure that you don't get power projected or blockaded. You can see here that I'm currently blockading Germany, and it shows you that I've got a power projection much higher than they have. Now, as soon as you get double the power projection of what they've got, then you will cause a blockade, and you definitely don't want that to happen to you. So what will happen if you get blockaded? It will have an immediate effect on your GDP. So at the start of the game, with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, I think I started off at around about 17 million GDP. Now, if you get blockaded, this will get reduced by a significant amount every single turn. So you can end up losing 1 million a turn. And when you only start off with 17 million, obviously that could be a dramatic amount at the start of the game. So not getting blockaded is the first thing that you want to make sure doesn't happen to you. Then the second most important thing is the transport capacity. You want to keep this as high as possible, preferably at 200%. Now, it's impossible to keep it at 200% all the time. Like, I've been fighting back-to-back wars, which is why I've lost so much and I'm down to 136. And when you've got territories all across the globe, like I have, I've got some over here, I've got all around here, I've got all across Russia and China and all down in Australasia as well. It's incredibly difficult to actually protect all of these sea zones. So what you will have to do when you've got a lot of territories is to not start a war until you've got around about 200% capacity. And then when you do start a war, only go to war with one nation at a time, never go to war with more than one nation. And then try and either finish the war as fast as possible, by which I mean call a peace quite quickly. So rather than extending the war as long as you can, just do a bit of damage, call an end to the war, and then build up your transport capacity again, and then do the same thing, rinse and repeat. Or knock out as many of their ships as possible if you can. If they don't have much ships, then they won't cause much damage to your transport capacity. So you can see how many ships each nation have got down here. So if you wanted, you can just try and start wars with the countries that don't have many ships. That way, they won't do much damage to your transport capacity. Now, another thing that's important is to keep building your shipbuilding capacity. So even though my max shipyard size is way above the limit, you still need to keep doing it because it will increase the amount of ships that you can build. So at the moment, what I've done just to test is to see how much of an effect going over the shipbuilding capacity actually has. Now, if we have a look at the ships that I'm building, these would have only taken 22 months to build, but they went up to 66 months in total. So it triples the amount if you build as many as you can. Basically, the maximum amount that it'll increase is triple. So it does. I think it doubles as soon as you go over. Even if you're only 1 ton over, it will double. And then if you go more than, this looks like about triple maybe. About triple the amount of the shipbuilding capacity is about the maximum penalty, which is triple the cost or the time as well. So always building your shipbuilding capacity is massively important. So the next thing that I will mention is at the start of the game, if you start the game in 1890, you are not going to have enough cash to be able to do what you want, basically, which most people will want to just build battleships. Now, this isn't going to be possible for you. You'll have to build torpedo boats primarily. You can build other ships as well if you wanted, but your best tool at the beginning of the game in 1890 are the torpedo boats. Now, what you can do if you want is avoid wars. So when you start a new game, you can basically start where you don't have any ships. So if you go onto Fleet Auto Generated and change this to create your own, you can actually start a new game. I think if you change the difficulty, you can make it harder or easier in terms of cash, but I don't think it makes too much difference. I always just play on the hardest anyway, but I don't think it actually makes that much difference. So if we start a new game here, basically you start off with no ships. So what you can do is start the campaign with 0 ships, and then this way you won't be spending any cash on maintaining your ships when you're not actually intending on going to a war. Now, if you do this, obviously you're going to be unprotected. So anybody who fights you now is basically going to end your campaign. So what you need to do is pay everybody off. Any time that someone wants to go to war with you, just pay them off. It doesn't really matter too much about the funds at the start of the game when paying them off, because you don't lose the game unless you go to -100 naval prestige. So you do get some opportunity to get loans. If you go below your cash, you spend 50 prestige and get a huge loan, basically. So what I recommend doing is at the start of the game, always build your shipyard whenever it's not building. Always put your transport capacity at max until you get to 200%, and then when you're at 200%, reduce it back down to 0. Keep your crew training at 0 at all times until later on in the game. And then with whatever money you have left, just put your research up to the amount which makes you break even, basically. So don't worry too much about not being at maximum research at the beginning of the game. It doesn't really make too much difference because the AI aren't very good at keeping up to date with their research anyway. Even if they have higher research than you, they don't build the ships and deploy them very quickly. So they're usually 10 years behind what you are, even if they've got a higher research than you have. And then from here, all you need to do is just pay everybody off so they don't fight you while you're building up your research. Now, there's two things, or three things really, that you want. Now, one of the things is induced boilers. Now, if you wanted, you could put these on here to speed up the process, but I've found that it doesn't really make too much difference. You may as well just leave them off so it doesn't affect the rest of your research, because each one of these you put on reduces the research spent on everything else dramatically. So, but the three things that you're after basically is induced boilers and double deck torpedo tubes, because at the moment you've only got single deck, and fast propulsion on your on this one, sorry, fast on your torpedo propulsion. So that is the three things that you want to be able to compete at the start of the game in 1890. Now that is going to take about 4.5 years, so you're not going to be able to fight any war for the first 4.5 years, basically. So all you're going to be doing is basically skipping turn and then trying to not get in any wars. So try to keep everybody happy if you can, but also you're going to need naval prestige. So if there's any chance that you can get naval prestige, then that's not a bad idea. So I would probably take this one for the naval prestige. And then take a bit of unrest. So all you're going to be doing is this for the first 4.5 years of the game until you've unlocked them three techs that you want: induced boilers, fast propulsion, and double deck torpedoes. And I'm going to show you, if we go back onto the other campaign, what you are going to be building as your first ship. So this will be the first ship that you build. It's basically going to be a torpedo boat with the minimum displacement, and then you're going to want a fair amount of range on and around about 28 kilometers or knots, sorry, speed. You want the induced boilers, so your engine efficiency is as close to 100 as you can get it. And then you've got two double torpedoes on the deck torpedoes. Now, the reason you want double decks is because they spread differently. If you have 4 singles, all the torpedoes will go in a line, which are all going to hit the exact part of the enemy ship, the exact same part as each other. Where if you have double deck, they shoot in a bit of a triangle shape, or a cone shape, I should say. So when they hit the enemy ship, they will hit at different parts of the ship. And that way, you'll be able to sink the enemy ships a lot easier than if you use single deck torpedoes. Then you're going to want the fast torpedo propulsion. Without this, the enemy ships are going to be able to dodge the torpedoes much more easily. And you want torpedo size as high as you can, but 17 inches is a nice one to start with. So fast torpedoes, 17-inch, induced boilers, double deck torpedoes. That is basically all you need. And then I've got a 4-inch gun on the front for shooting enemy torpedo boats. You want the beam and the draft as low as possible. This will keep the cost as low as possible. and you want the crew as low as possible, so you can fit more ships into the task force, and so you don't need to train as many crew, because crew doesn't really make too much difference for the torpedo boats. You want bulkheads at maximum at all times. If you don't do this, then even the tiniest little bit of damage will sink your ships, basically. So you always want maximum bulkheads on every one of your ship designs. So that will be your first torpedo boat, and then you basically want to refit and design new torpedo boats when you get propulsion upgrades. So this first one, the range of the torpedoes is 700 meters, and then when you get a new propulsion upgrade, I think it goes up to 1.1 kilometers, so an extra 400 meters. And then you'd keep doing the same thing. I didn't actually do it in this campaign, but you would keep doing the same thing every time you get a new propulsion system. You'd refit all of your torpedo boats, basically. So for the first probably 10 to 20 years, so 1907, so 13 years for me it was, 1894 to 1907, I used only torpedo boats. Now, there are multiple reasons to do this. One, it means that you can have loads of ships and you're not relying on just one or two battleships. You've got tons and tons of ships, so you can take losses and it doesn't make too much difference. Two is you're able to spread them out in different areas, so you can actually start conquering different areas. I think I started conquering Tunisia, Algeria with torpedo boats, and then I basically just started conquering quite a lot of Africa with the torpedo boats while leaving enough torpedo boats behind to prevent myself from being blockaded. So what you will do is you'll advance to 1894 while building up your research. Then every time the shipbuilding is completed, you get it going again, so you get more and more shipbuilding capacity, and you just build as many torpedo boats as you can with the shipbuilding capacity that you have available. Every time that you finish your shipbuilding, you just set another batch going of torpedo boats. So you will probably end up with around about 1,000 torpedo boats. Obviously, you will need to replace your losses as well, but you'll probably end up building 1,000 plus torpedo boats while doing this, and you will use these to take over territories. Now, the reason this is important is because you need to take territories to be able to increase your funds quickly. So, if you have a look at your GDP is affected primarily by the amount of territory that you own. If you hover over each territory, it'll tell you how much income it'll provide. Now, this doesn't get added on directly, I don't think, but basically, the higher the income, the higher the GDP that it gives you. So you just want to keep taking as much territory as you can while protecting your sea zone. And then once you've got your dreadnought, your first dreadnought unlocked, is when you then start building your battleships. Now you'll still use your torpedo boats, but this will be when you start building your first battleships. And then it'll take a while for you to actually get a load of battleships, so you'll still be using torpedo boats for quite a few years, but you'll be gradually building as many battleships as you can. And this is the design that I recommend. It doesn't need to be identical, but this is what I recommend. Unfortunately, when you research new weapons, sorry, they automatically get updated. You can't keep your old ones on the ship when you go on the refit. So these guns are obviously a bigger size than the previous researched guns. That's why they don't currently fit, but the previous research ones did fit. Now, what I recommend is to have different caliber guns on your front two and your back two main guns. So these front ones, the front ones I've got as the 12 inches and the back ones as the 13 inches. Now, I won't go into the reason as to why you do this, but it's all comes down to the recoil mechanics in the game. Basically, there's no point in having more than 3 of the same caliber turret, basically, because the 4th caliber, the recoil is so high that it always has 0% accuracy, basically. So there's no point in having 4 13 or 12 inches. You may as well separate them into pairs or triples. Pairs is what I recommend, but triples is fine. But never go for quads of the same caliber gun to avoid the recoil penalty. And then you just fill the rest of your ship with as many guns that can take out the light cruisers, torpedo boats, and destroyers, basically. And once again, put the range as high as you can, put the bulkheads as high as you can, put the beam and the draft as low as you can to make the cost of the vessel as low as possible. Make sure you have at least 100 engine efficiency. Going over is fine, it'll give you more power projection. And you want as many shells, as much ammo as possible, so put the ammo up to increased. You want the shell size on light at the beginning of the game. This will primarily target the belt of the opponents. If you put it on heavy, it will target the deck of the opponents, and you don't really need to do that until later on in the game. So I'd recommend don't just stay at light until you get after 1930, and then at that point you can move over to the heavies. And then you want coincidence rangefinders at all times. And this is about the armour scheme that you want. About 12-inch belt with half on the fore and aft, and then about 3-inch deck with about 1.5 on the fore and aft on the deck. The only reason I've got the aft on higher is to change the fore and aft weight offset, basically. And then try and put some on your superstructure as well, just so your funnels and towers don't get knocked out by the small caliber guns of the enemies. And that is about it for the ship design. So basically now I'll show you how to actually use your torpedo boats. So this is probably the trickiest part of the game, and a lot of people will probably struggle with using torpedo boats, a lot of new players anyway. So what I'll do is I'll quickly set up in a custom battle the types of scenarios that you're going to be running into and the easiest way to control your ships. Okay, so this will be a typical battle that you'll face. So if you split your ships up into task forces of about 50 torpedo boats, then you'll be able to take on most of what the enemy has to offer. You probably won't be able to finish them off entirely, but you'll be able to do enough damage to stop them from being a threat. One thing I did forget to mention is you'll be putting your torpedo ammo down to reduced. So they've only got one load of ammo, and then they're basically useless. So they're just one and done. You're not going to be hanging around reloading. So the first thing you'll do, select all of your ships and turn the torpedoes off. Then if you click on this division button and click on detach, it'll actually attach them all together. Then click on the division and do that same thing again. This will now break them all up into individual ships. Now if you select all of your ships and just click somewhere in the sea, then what it'll do is it will set them all on a daisy chain, so they'll all be following on from one another. It's the same thing as if they were all in a division. The only difference is when they're all separate like this, you're able to control each individual ship, rather than if they were all in one division, you can only control the very lead ship. So this is much easier to control. So do this at the beginning of the battle, and then you can actually see which the lead ship is down here where it says battle line. All the others will say follow. But if you've got more than 50 ships, then you might not actually be able to see down here. So you can try and identify which the lead ship is by looking for this green line, or if you just increase the speed, then one of the ships will eventually come out in front and you know that that is the ship that you're going to be controlling. So all you'll be doing is heading towards the enemy, and then when you get within torpedo range, turn your torpedoes on, and then as soon as they've fired, just retreat. So it's pretty simple. If the ship in front gets damaged, then you're going to want to select the ship behind it and take it out of the daisy just by clicking anywhere on the screen, just to get it out of the daisy. Otherwise, it will slow down to the speed of the ship that it's following, basically. And if the ship in front is damaged, like has a damaged engine, then the ship behind will slow down too much. You don't want them, you want them to go full speed, basically. So you'll see that you will take quite a lot of damage from the enemy ships at the beginning of the fight, because they're all clumped up. But as the fight goes on, the enemy ships will start spreading out and you'll be able to pick them off a lot more easily. So if ships do get destroyed in the daisy chain, then it will create a new daisy chain line, basically. This can be a little bit awkward to deal with, but if you can just find the front of the second daisy chain line and then just tell them to follow onto one of the other daisy chain lines, or just use, if you can multitask, use two different daisy chain lines to attack the enemy with. Okay, so I've actually got 2.3 kilometers range with this in the custom battle, but in the campaign you'll only have 0.7 or 0.9, so you have to get really close. It's about there before you can actually fire your torpedoes. So all you do is just head towards them with the ship behind. Just break off so it doesn't slow down, and then as soon as you take damage, like now, just turn to the side, turn your torpedoes on, and then start controlling this ship. Now, unfortunately, there is a bug in the game. They have done a fairly decent job at ironing out most of the bugs in the game, but there is still a bug in the game where, as you saw there, it only fired one of the deck torpedoes and not the other. Well, unfortunately, for some reason, if you turn too sharply, one of the torpedo launchers doesn't rotate. So what you would end up having to do is to turn back the opposite way and try and level your ship out, and then you'll see here that one of them starts to turn again. But it's a little bit awkward. You see there, when I leveled the ship out, the launchers start turning again. So it's not ideal, but that's the reason that your launchers sometimes don't shoot, is because you're turning too sharply. So just level your ship out. Sometimes you actually, if you've gone too far this way, sometimes you actually have to go a little bit further the opposite direction to unlock the turrets. But usually you can get it to fire or turn just by going straight forward. So this may not look ideal at the moment, but it is the cheapest and easiest way to actually compete at the start of the game with minimal funds. So as you can see, we're starting to land some torpedoes, and then all you're going to do is just try and knock each ship out. Just try and target down one ship at a time, while trying to keep them away from your main bulk over there, basically. So I'm not going to play the whole battle because obviously it'll take a long time. This is just a demonstration video, but hopefully you can see that it's possible to actually sink quite a few ships while using just the torpedo boats. And obviously you can take out enemy battleships and everything with torpedoes, so there are no enemies that you can not defeat when using the torpedo boats, which is nice. And you can use them for forever, basically, because even later on in the campaign you can just increase the torpedo propulsion so you can fire from further away, and you can just use them as long range snipers. Okay, so that is the first way that you're going to be using the ships. Now I'm going to show you the second way that you'll be using your torpedo boats. Okay, so this is going to be the second way that you use your torpedo boats. So eventually in the campaign, the enemy research is going to get to the point where they're going to be able to kill your torpedo boats one by one too quickly for the previous strategy to work. So you're going to need to change your strategy, and instead of doing a daisy chain, what you're going to want to do, so you do the same thing as last time, turn the torpedoes off, split them all up into individuals, and then select them all, and what you're going to do is use them as like a locust swarm. So if you hold down Control and then right click in the sea, try and do it as close to the horizon as possible so your ships don't clump up. So right click with Control held down, that will stop them from going in a daisy chain and tell each individual ship to head in that direction. If you've got the if you've got the control button held down when right clicking. Now what you're going to do, you'll be heading straight towards the enemy. So on this scenario, this particular strategy works better when you're only facing one enemy rather than a fleet, like we did in the previous strategy. So it's unfortunately you won't be able to take out fleets anymore when you get to the point where the guns out-tech the torpedoes, basically. So just keep holding control button held down with right clicking in the direction that the enemy ship's going. And then when you start getting close, like now, you can lower the speed a bit. And then all you're going to do is basically start trying to fire off some torpedoes to get him to turn. That'll slow him down. You don't have to do this, because you will catch up with him eventually, because we've got a 28 knot speed and he's only 21 knot speed. So you just turn the torpedoes on. Unfortunately, it's just out of range, so it's not going to work from that distance. Sorry, let me just turn the sound effects down a minute. And then as you start getting close to them, you just start turning the ship's torpedoes on one by one. And then you can select these, hold down control and right click just to do some more maneuvers. I'm going to turn all of these torpedoes on. Same with these. Turn all of their torpedoes on. So you will get a lot of friendly fire with the torpedoes doing this. But friendly fire on your own torpedo boats is a small price to pay to take out enemy battleships. And then, if you can, try and separate out the ones that have fired the torpedoes and the ones that haven't. And then come round and take another pass. We've actually been really unlucky with where the torpedoes have landed. We've landed 28 torpedoes and not a single one has hit the two middle compartments. That's just how the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. So we can split them up. Some go one side and some go the other like we did before. As you can see, quite a lot of friendly fire there, because I turned everybody's torpedoes on rather than just the ones closest to them. But if you want, you can pause the game and just select the ships that are closest to them to prevent unnecessary friendly fire. But there you go, we've sunk a 17k ton battleship that was worth 115 million with a bunch of torpedo boats that were worth 1 million each. So we lost 4 million worth of torpedo boats and did 115 million worth of damage. So yeah, that's the second way of using the torpedo boats that I recommend switching to once the enemy ships start becoming too good, too advanced in the gun technology. And then I'll quickly show you how I recommend using battleships. So I'm just setting up a likely scenario that you would face in a campaign battle. And this is how I recommend keeping your formation. So usually the AI actually starts you off in basically the formation that you want to keep your ships in. You want one division that you control with all of the other divisions following onto it, and this will keep you in like a Death Star formation. Well, what I recommend is with the formation that you have at front, you only have one ship. So I would detach the very front ship, and then with the ships behind it, just set them to follow. So you're literally just selecting everybody apart from the lead ship, telling them all to follow the lead ship. And then all you're going to do is just control the lead ship with everybody following behind. This way, you haven't got a really long battle line. It's really difficult to protect from torpedoes when you've got a really long battle line. And then what you're going to want to do, as the enemies start coming close to you, like they are doing now, start turning away from them. And then we're basically going to be sailing backwards as we're killing the torpedo threats that the enemy are going to be firing at us. Now, you're still likely to get hit with a few torpedoes, but as you can see here, these torpedoes that they've just fired, I'm going to dodge because I'd preempted that they were going to be firing at me. Unfortunately, these fired directly towards us, which is pretty rare, to be fair. I don't think I turned fast enough. I was too busy talking at the start. But most of them are going to miss because we preemptively turned. Looks like this one might hit. Got a few that hit there. But so far, not a huge amount of torpedoes have landed. And that was a pretty dangerous situation that we were in. Yeah, they are taking quite a long time to turn, unfortunately. So it's probably because I've got the avoid ship collision on. So you might be better off turning that avoid ship collision off. So we could try it again with the avoid ship collision turned off. Okay, so detach the front ship. and then tell everybody else to follow the front ship. And then what we're going to do this time is turn this avoid off on all of the following ships. And that way they should turn a bit quicker. Okay, so they're starting to get closer to us now, so let's start turning away from them. So once again it looks like I didn't turn quite early enough, but the majority of the torpedoes are going to miss. I think 2 torpedoes landed there, which is not too bad. Got another one landed there. But yeah, if I'd have just turned a little bit sooner, it would have been a lot better. Well, I think my ships did a lot better job at actually turning this time, with the avoid turned off on all of the following ships. We haven't actually lost any ships yet, which is quite surprising, to be honest with you. There we go. We have started to lose one. Maybe a few more now. But it's almost impossible to fight these large fleet battles without taking any casualties. I do highly recommend putting torpedo protection and maybe double or triple bottom on all of your battleships, just to reduce the amount of damage that you take from torpedoes. But yeah, anyway, that's how I would recommend controlling your battleships. And that about covers all of the strategy that you will need for most of the game. It starts to get a little bit harder again when they start getting oxygen torpedoes. You have to maintain a huge distance, and you can try and bait out the enemy torpedo, like destroyers and that, with your own destroyers. Try and bait out them firing the torpedoes, but there's not much really to discuss in terms of strategy. Just send your battle fleet one direction and your destroyers in a different direction. So when they do bait out torpedoes, they don't fire the torpedoes in the same direction as your battle lines going, basically. And that's about it. So yeah, if you follow these strategy guide tips, then you'll be able to start conquering territory really early on in the game, which will give you a load of GDP, which will then enable you to start putting your tech budget up to full, and you can even put some crew training on. Always have it above 50% if you don't want to lose any of your crew experience. If you've got it lower than 50%, you'll lose crew experience. So just have it at 50% or 51%. And yeah, that's basically all there is to it. And then you can just start one by one conquering each of the enemy nations. I recommend starting with the weakest first, but you can start with the strongest first if you fancy a challenge. And there's not much more to it. So I hope these tips have helped, and let me know if you have success or if you're struggling with anything in particular, and I will try to help. Cheers for watching, take care, I shall see you soon.